We are currently live for the second installment of the Union County Young Republican Book Club. I'm J.D. Bryden, chairman of the Union County Young Republicans. I'm here with
Vincent Liacona, the secretary of the Union County Young Republicans.
Yes. For this meeting, for this book club, we are going to be discussing The Hunger Games by Susanna Collins. Not to be confused with Susan Collins, who is a senator from Maine, I think.
Yeah.
So, or was. I'm not sure. She might be no longer a senator from Maine. So, in addition to Hunger Games itself, I want to talk about how Hunger Games has been impacted by other books in the genre, how Hunger Games itself has kind of defined in a lot of ways young adult literature in the past 4 or 5 years. There's been a lot of dystopian literature out there, just stuff that you might not normally. It was kind of a hard shift from vampires to evil dictators, and governments trying to kill you, from werewolves trying to kill you, which again was kind of a switch from evil wizards trying to kill you. So there's been kind of a shift in young adult literature in the past 10 to 15 years. So just to start off, the book, The Hunger Games, just a quick summary for those of you who haven't read it. And of course, this is for the podcast audience, not for Vince and I, who are here and have read the books. It's about a girl who, in order to save her little sister from participating in this horrendous blood sport called the Hunger Games, volunteers herself and gets sent from her district, which is subservient to a centralized capital, to this horrible, brutal game called the Hunger Games, where you have a bunch of kids from each of the 12 districts, one boy and one girl from each of the 12 districts, competing against each other in a fight to the finish. There's going to be one person left. Like, they are killing each other. It is a brutal murder, blood sport of a game. So this was done to in response to an uprising in a 13th colony that got nuked, or something bad happened to him. Suffice it to say, by the capital, and in memory of this, the Hunger Games have been held, and they're held every year, and it's meant for a couple different reasons. It's meant to keep the masses entertained, but it's also meant as a fear tactic. They're literally ripping young kids away from their families, from their parents, from their not very free, but still there's some freedom left in these districts, but not a whole lot of it. Ripping them away from that lifestyle and putting them into this blood sport for the sake of entertainment value, really.
And control.
And control, yes. And the story is about Katniss Everdeen, who is the protagonist, making it through, surviving the Hunger Games, and in the process, making herself a revolutionary figure in some respects, not intentionally, but through certain situations during the course of the Hunger Game. So Vince, just to start off, what do you think? What did you think of the Hunger Games? What's your review off the top of the head?
So I think it's an excellent book, excellent movie. I think the movie is actually very true to the book in many respects. A little more condensed, though. One thing I really like about the Hunger Games is it really features a overpowering government who's subjecting the people to a lack of freedom and to forcing them to do their bidding. And I think it's very much it's an extreme view, likely wouldn't happen, but it's a good view on kind of like what could happen if you get into a Hitler-like regime or something really extreme. I also like a lot of the more I looked at it, the more I saw Roman-based.
Yes.
A lot of the names are Roman. A lot of the symbolism is Roman.
Well, the name of the country that they're in is Panem, and that is a reference to Panem and circenses, which is bred in circuses, a way to keep a populace in control, in check. In ancient Rome, they had a system where they gave their citizens wheat for free and had free circuses. And there were actually, I think his name is Juvenal, one of the politicians of the day, who cried out about this and said that the citizenry were really giving up their responsibility in order to just be amused and have the food that they want. So, I think that symbolism is pretty strong. Symbolism game for the Hunger Games, very strong, and it also draws a lot. I know I've read interviews from the author that it was, she first came up with it when she was flipping channels on her TV, from a reality TV show to the invasion of Iraq. And that's pretty stark. And I can understand where a lot of the themes, could seem like that. You were putting these kids into a war zone, essentially, against each other. And it is very much treated like a reality TV show. You have sponsors. Something that I was actually... We'll get into it a little bit later, but something that I thought was very interesting upon rewatching and rereading was the concept of, during the Hunger Games, which I admit we didn't really outline as well as I should have, the tributes, the participants who, normally are very unwilling, have nothing going in. They have no tools, they have no weapons, they have nothing. There's something called the cornucopia at the very beginning. It's like a game of tag, really. It starts off where, there's this big pile of weapons in the middle, and you can either choose to go and run for the weapons or run away from your opponents who are out to kill you.
It's basically a big trap.
Yeah, it's a big trap. So without any of that aid, you're left to sort of try and sustain yourself and survive the environment of the Hunger Games, which is different depending upon the year. This one, it's a very forested area, which is beneficial to Katniss, who has spent a great deal of her life in a rural area, hunting, and that's something that's kind of an important point. She owns a bow. She shoots small game. She gets that, brings that into her family, which is not really, we're not talking about people who are thriving. We're talking about people who are scraping together whatever living they can. There's government assistance, but they also have to work, and anything extra is very strictly regulated. There's a black market that gets burnt down by the government forces, and it's any kind of capitalism is really tried to get squashed by the government. They want to have the economy as controlled as possible.
You could say socialist here.
Well, you could say that, but it's very much a authoritarian environment, and there really is no economy but what the government dictates. So, if you want to call that socialism, yes, but it's very much a brutal situation. So anyway, Katniss, who spent her life in the rural areas, I'm going to pick up the phone just so that the ambient noises are a little bit less. So she's thrust into this environment with one of her compatriots from her district. Right, that's what I was trying to get to say. I was talking about the assistance, the aids the aid that they get from outside the Hunger Games. So this thing, as I said, it's a big competition that is aired on TV in the Capitol. They have essentially American Idol. Yeah, there you go. So, they have that kind of voting system where you vote for your favorites and it impacts their score. With the Hunger Games, you can give aid to your favorite competitor, and that comes in various different forms. The more beloved a competitor, the better the gifts that they get.
I think that's important because the Hunger Games aren't just a challenge of who's the toughest or who's the one who can cause the most death, but also the one who's the best at the political game.
Who's most popular? Is that what you're saying? Most popular?
Yeah. And that's one thing that Peter Millark, who's the other person from the district, at her district, he's very good at. He's very good at the political game. He's very good at playing the crowd. She's poor at it, but she unintentionally, becomes better at it as time goes on.
Yeah. That whole succeeding at the popularity contest, it's a very interesting concept. So anyway, this assistance, it doesn't come from, it's extremely expensive, number one, to send in this assistance. And a lot of it is just, sent in from the capital, sent in from these rich elites to help out people who are in dire straits. It's not really meant to win the game for them. It's just meant to help them out, which, there's some very interesting parallels there you could draw to the sort of endless loop of the welfare state. That, it's never actually about getting you out of the situation you're in. It's just constantly keeping you in it. That's something that has been on my brain for a long time in preparation for this.
Never thought of it that way. Yeah.
It's kind of, and it's messed up. It's a really messed up system. So anyway, throughout the course of the Hunger Games, Katniss spends a great deal of time evading. She's not really killing too many people. She's trying to escape. She finds herself in some bad situations, gets out of that. Somewhere along the line, she acquires bow and arrow.
I think she directly kills only one person. She indirectly kills others.
She kills somebody in self-defense. The situation with Rue in the 11th district, which is a big factor in this. So along the way, she encounters the tribute from the 11th district, who is, I believe, a 9-year-old or 12-year-old girl. 12-year-old girl.
Right on the edge.
That's right.
Yeah.
12-year-old girl named Rue.
And we should mention that Katniss, her younger sister, is 12, and Rue is supposed to be a lot like her younger sister.
Exactly. There's very reminiscent there. And, that's how brutal this game is that this person who's 12-year-old, a little girl, has been thrust into this blood sport. And she gets brutally murdered. Katniss eventually kills the killer. They both get attacked. And Katniss, in a just, after they've bonded for a very long time, Katniss is so overcome with grief, she gives a nice sort of, not burial, but leaves Rue in a actually cares about the body, about Rue, and it's clear to everybody who's watching, and does a symbol gesture that is a gesture of their people, I believe, in the 11th district, and that causes just a massive upheaval in the 11th district. This is not known to any of the actual contestants at the time, or I don't want to call them contestants.
The tributes.
It's not known to them, but this is going on in the background. There are major political ramifications to this behavior, which is really just, Katniss being a decent person.
Actually, one of my favorite lines happens there because President Snow, who's the president of Panem, he's the dictator. He's the dictator, but it's really an oligarchy. They're all running it together. But it was an interesting thing with Seneca, who's the game master. Yes. Another Roman name, by the way.
Yes, exactly.
So he's the game master. He's the one actually making the game, and we should mention, even though it's a forest, it's controlled by the game master. So it's an artificial they can do whatever they want there. And that's part of the unfairness of it all. But one of my favorite lines that President Snow says to Seneca is, "A little bit of hope is good. A lot of bit of hope is dangerous."
Yeah.
And that's what he gets scared of, that they're making this girl and they could make her into a martyr.
Yeah, absolutely. There are talks about being an underdog and having an underdog champion and all of this stuff. So the elites are taking notice of Katniss and what Katniss is doing and how dangerous it is. And that leads to some changes later on in the way that the game is formed. Halfway through, they change the rules.
They change the rules constantly.
They do. They constantly change the rules. But at one point, they changed the rules to allow two victors, provided they're from the same district. And this plays into a real fake love triangle, but it's only binary because the third person in the love triangle isn't in the Hunger Games. Gale, who is stuck at home, is outside of the Hunger Games, and he's watching this blossoming romance, but not really romance, between Katniss and Peeta, and so this plays into the rules. And again, just to show how brutal these people are who are running this game, it eventually comes down to three people. Katniss and I think they might have changed the rules before it comes down to the three people. At some point.
No, as soon as Cato's killed.
As soon as that's right, Cato's
killed by the dogs with the faces of the tributes.
Okay, so it comes down to three people. Then one of the richer districts who are basically, trained to do the Hunger Games sort of stuff.
I think Cato's District 1.
Yeah, District 1. District 1 and District 2 are the two big sort of military kind of districts who make up the...
They're the crony militarists.
Yes, make up the military force for the capital. And so all of their combatants, their tributes are military trained from the time that they're born. Really, it comes down to him and Katniss and Peeta at the beginning of the back at the cornucopia. He dies, gets killed by these just horrible monstrosities, hybrid dogs that have the faces of the fallen competitors. It's like really, really messed up psychological games that are happening here.
And mind you, this is all between the game makers and the two tributes, not between the tributes themselves.
Right.
So the game makers are playing a bigger game with them than the tributes are really playing with each other.
Exactly. So what they do is the game makers change the rules and say that no, instead of allowing two people from the same district to both win, they change the rules back to only one person, to try and remove that martyrdom element, to try and remove the to make one of them seem really like a bad guy, because if it's kill or be killed, that's bad. That somebody's going to come out looking bad. Somebody's going to hate one of those two people.
Yeah.
But what happens, and it wasn't planned this way clearly, but it was an amazing. I think it was a really good twist. Was that they have these poison berries that I think they used previously to the girl with the fox face.
She died, yeah.
Yeah. So minor characters doesn't matter.
Yes.
So anyway, the two tributes, Katniss and Peeta, threaten to commit suicide rather than comply with the games makers, with the Capitol's wishes. And
of course, would be the ultimate martyrdom of all.
Of course it would. And instead, the game makers balk, they blink, and now they have a predicament on their hands, because you have two very, very popular champions who defied all odds to win the Hunger Games. And
you know something?
What?
I was looking at... This is one of those symbols I didn't get initially when I was reading the book or watching the movie. But now I saw the movie again, I'm like, I get it now. The berries are a good representation of freedom. They're the freedom to either end the life on their own terms, or to get out of that world. And then later, which is another one of my favorite parts, is when they lock Seneca in the room with the berries.
Yep.
His only way out, his only way to get freedom, is to kill himself.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I don't want to spoil the future books, but one of the things that blew my mind really was in Mockingjay, which is the last in the series. Some events occur, and Katniss is essentially imprisoned in her own room, and they have denied her even the ability to commit suicide, and that's flat out expressed, written out that she's incapable of even ending her own life, and that really does bring up these, concepts that we don't really think about in society that we have right now. There are laws in place to prevent you from committing suicide. There are. However, in our situation, they're slightly more understandable. It's not that you are incapable of doing it because they want total and complete control over you. It's more of a thing to. I mean, I don't know. It's really hard to defend, quite frankly, that last final freedom to whether or not to kill yourself. It's very morbid and very sad, but it really is something to think about when you're not even allowed that kind of a controlling government, controlling influence on your life, that you can't even end it. So anyway, the book ends with Katniss and Peeta, triumphant heroes, but being told that, hey, y'all done messed up because
stirred up some feelings.
There's some serious repercussions here that have happened because of all these events that really haven't happened in prior Hunger Games, whether it's Katniss and how she treats Rue, or the stunning double victory, which again doesn't happen. Things have changed among the districts, and people are less content, we'll say, with the government as it is, and there are revolts, and more of this gets covered in the next book.
And a lot of the revolts are in the outer districts, not in the inner districts. Remember, they're kind of the cronies, so they don't want to revolt. They want to keep the
system.
They
have it okay in those places. So the outliers, the ones that are worked the hardest, they're the ones who are getting it the worst. So, that a lot of the repercussions unfold in Catching Fire, which is, again, I think Catching Fire is probably the best of the three books. It's extremely good. It's something I hope eventually we'll get to cover here.
And how will the Capitol handle uprisings?
Exactly. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure people will be just happy, and they'll be able to make the best of the situation. That's exactly what's going to happen. There won't be any trouble. Everybody will just be fine. It'll be fine. But yeah, this book series was one that I didn't pick up as a young adult, or I guess I did. Whatever. It's hard to say what 24 is. I was like, it's kind of in there. 3 years ago, I read this book, and I wasn't on the initial wave of the Hunger Games. It had already been a big deal, cultural phenomenon, and it has been a cultural phenomenon, sort of following in the same trend as Harry Potter and Twilight, and then Hunger Games. I think that's kind of how it's gone for young adult literature in the past 10, 15 years. So it filled that sort of Harry Potter void that people had after Twilight was over. And it really had a profound effect, I think, on the shaping of young adult literature. A lot of copycats came out. Maybe it's unfair to call Divergent a copycat. It's similarly dystopian, but it has a lot of different twists.
We can say that Hunger Games paved the way for some of those others.
For a lot of these other things. And plus, you mentioned it. You saw the movie recently. It's a huge multi-billion-dollar film franchise, and lots of people have seen this, and I think there are a lot of ideas. I mean, as we've talked about here, there are a lot of conservative ideals. There are a lot of libertarian ideas that you can convey through the Hunger Games. And I think that by and large, we missed a big opportunity in talking about a lot of these things when it was big. I mean, I missed it just because I wasn't reading those books at the time that they came out. But so many of those themes of being encumbered by a large government, by having government forces come in and destroy a marketplace.
A lot of very pro-freedom ideas.
A lot of very pro-freedom ideas and anti-authoritarian ideas. And, you know, it's not something that maybe everybody would approach from that level. I mean, if you're just reading this book, I don't know that you're going to apply a lot of these things, but it's certainly you're going to feel revulsion when it comes to people like President Snow. You're going to feel extremely upset when you read about, you know, the brutal beatings and the burning down of the marketplace, you know, by capital forces.
I was going to say it gets especially interesting once you get to Mockingjay, and I don't want to spoil too much in case people want to read it, but it's just interesting to see the parallel.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll leave it at. That'll be my hint for you to read Catching Fire and Mockingjay.
Yeah. Something else that I think is interesting is that I think Hunger Games doesn't feel quite like a lot of the other dystopian books that I know. You know, Fahrenheit 451, 1984. Some certain elements are similar for sure, but the poverty, the sort of squalor, I think is of the districts. I think is approaching it from a different stance. There's a lot more inequality and a lot more difficulty in the lives of the average person in the Hunger Games, I think, than is really shown.
Did we mention it, by the way, that the winning district is the one who actually gets money that year?
Oh, that's true.
And so it's always rigged so that the districts closest, who are all militaristic, will almost always have the best shot of winning it.
Absolutely.
The government always favors them.
Right. So it's, you know, it's impressive that you're getting these, you're getting all these bonuses, these, the food, the wealth brought to your district. But again, we'll see in Catching Fire how well that works out. So yeah, I mean, Katniss is a much different protagonist from Montauk in Fahrenheit 451, and all of the stuff that happens in 1984, extremely different, just from the level of the point of view characters.
Although I love that Katniss is she becomes the symbol,
yes,
and she doesn't even intend for that to happen, which is I think how revolutions a lot of the time happen.
Yeah, Katniss is very aloof. She just wants to be left alone.
Yeah,
and that is the prevailing thought, I think, from her perspective, is all of this stuff is happening to me, happening to us, happening to my family. I just want to live in peace, not have to deal with all of this stuff. That's a very conservative mindset, not wanting to deal with a government that is imposing unfair rules and laws on you, or taking two kids from a district. That's some serious taxation without representation right there.
Yeah,
that is something I will say is similar to 1984, especially when you're talking about the breakdown, the kind of mental games that get played on the tributes. You mentioned the dogs that have the faces of the dead tributes, which is just a terrifying concept. Us talking about it really doesn't do it justice, and it doesn't appear this way in the film.
No,
because they wouldn't get a PG-13 rating on that. Or I don't know. It just doesn't seem like something.
You only see the faces of the tributes in the. You don't see them. You would imagine them in the book. Yeah,
and it's gruesome and graphic. You brought up Lord of the Flies.
Yes.
I'd love to hear how you think Lord of the Flies impacts the Hunger Games.
No, I think there's a lot of elements of Lord of the Flies about how people will break down into, and it was Lord of the Flies was a cultural book about how people break down into the most basic needs, and well that society will break down when all rules are taken away in a crazy sort of way. The theory of the Hunger Games is a little like that, but it goes in a different direction, and it goes into a more of a freedom-oriented direction. Instead of Piggy dying, and that's the big type of thing. By the way, spoiler alert: if you haven't read Lord of the Flies on a 60-year book,
exactly.
Yeah, but if you haven't read that, that's what ends up happening, and that's like kind of the big event that happens before they descend into total chaos. But in this, it's just the reverse, in my view.
Right. No, I agree. I think that's a very good point. Sort of the in one book you have Piggy, and I think that's something that needs to be said. Lord of the Flies is about kids who are stranded on an island without any adult supervision, and that's things go okay for a little bit, but then they really, really, really get insanely bad. Strong charismatic leaders doesn't seem like a very good idea. I just want to point that out. Strong, charismatic leaders really doesn't seem to go...
I don't know who he's hinting about, though. I'm not sure.
Doesn't seem to go fabulously well. They aren't a huge success.
They're not a huge success.
Yes. But there is that kind of interesting, I'm trying to say, distinction between Piggy dying and Rue dying.
Yes.
And how that contrasts the way that the story shifts and skews after those respective deaths.
Weak innocence.
Yeah.
That's what I call it. Like somebody who was young and too weak to defend themselves the right way.
Which, in a way, I mean, that's government's role, right? Government's role is to protect the weak and the innocent,
precisely,
who can't fight. But in the Hunger Games, that's not what the government does.
No, just the reverse.
Exactly, just the opposite. It's up to somebody else, a person who has no real interest, but a moral responsibility that she feels.
And is actually. What's even more, I think, amazing is she's incentivized to kill her.
Exactly.
To keep her alive.
Exactly. There's an incentive to slit her throat when she's not looking.
Yeah.
And that's not what happens. They have a mutually beneficial relationship. They act as a team, and sadly, it doesn't end up well for Rue.
Ends up well. Ends up well for
Katniss, but it's again, it's like it's hard to say that it ends well for very much of anybody.
And spoiler alert, it ends up well for Panem too.
Well, right. So, you have all of these themes that we've done our best to ignore. That's a ton of stuff. And it gets me that for whatever strange reason, the Republican conservative movement has been so balkanized. It's within itself that it doesn't want to accept any outside culture.
Yeah. To
a large extent, and it's weird because there's certainly a lot of the people that I read are not like that. A lot of the people that there's a reason that Andrew Breitbart sort of breathed as much life into the movement as he did, talking a lot about the culture. Politics is downstream of culture, and sort of inspiring a lot of people to go into the cultural side of things and participate there. Read books that are not just on the Wealth of Nations and the Road to Serfdom.
Although those are very good to read in addition to cultural.
Well, not on the Wealth of not the Wealth of Nations.
Yeah.
Wealth of Nations that's a good
painful
thing to use as a doorstop.
That's painful. Not gonna deny it.
If you need to build a small building and all you have is copies of the Wealth of Nations, you're probably doing okay.
Adam Smith, brilliant thinker, not such a good writer.
Listen, I'll give the first book a 4 out of 10.
Fair enough.
You can stay awake through it at least.
Fair enough.
The dialogue about pins, perfect. Not dialogue, but it's whatever his little rant about pins, excellent.
But to bring it back, I think you bring up an important point. I mean, culture and politics have one big thing in common. It's sociology. It's people.
Yeah.
People are an integral part of both, and they create both. Political systems aren't created out of thin air. They're created by people.
Yes, they are.
Out of their ideas. Culture is created out of the ideas of people. And when enough of those ideas come together, it creates a huge culture that we get.
I just want to point out that this meeting is happening at a Starbucks, and we are two Republicans at a Starbucks.
We haven't gotten beaten up yet.
Nope, not yet. Nobody's even looked at us, so that's very nice. And we're having a conversation about the Hunger Games. How is this happening in public? That's something that we have not really done well as a movement, is embrace what we can in pop culture that enforces not enforces, but sort of backstops a lot of our beliefs. And now we have a cultural figure in Donald Trump, who's the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party, who made his way, and it really is. It's sort of a demonstration of culture being upstream in politics.
Yes.
That Donald Trump, who's cultivated this cultural image.
The Apprentice.
He's been, on our TV screens since before I was born. And he's been
since before I've been born.
Yeah,
I'm
really.
older than you.
he's been a public figure for a very long time, and has built this image, and he's been able to use that, and that's something that Ted Cruz, he can talk about the Constitution all day long, and he does, and that's the problem. And it's the same problem with Rand Paul, and it's the same problem with Carly Fiorina, it's the same problem with Marco Rubio, it's the same problem with all these jabronis.
I would argue even Hillary Clinton.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Hillary Clinton.
But look at what somebody like Trump or Bernie Sanders does.
Well, Bernie Sanders, I think, is less of a case of the culture winning, and more that he has a single issue that
certainly.
He's he's the fairness candidate, and he's the free education candidate, and I think fairness is something that a lot of people care about, and he's been consistent on that. He thinks he's been making that one of the buzzwords of his campaign, and again, free school is extremely helpful to people who are suffering under ridiculous student loan debt, because you have bloated institutions that aren't set up to deal with the kind of system that we live in today. You have I won't go on a diatribe about how broken our education system is, but you have that's something that I think is very interesting to note, how Donald Trump is really a cultural candidate more so than an ideological candidate, which you can tell because if you listen to anything he says, he'll reverse himself several times throughout the course of a single.
I really don't know what he stands for.
It's hard. It's hard to get anything tacked down, but he presents himself as this figure that he's created, this character. He's almost the Stephen Colbert of presidential candidates, which is weird because Stephen Colbert was the Stephen Colbert of presidential candidates. Yeah. But he's got this character that he portrays that, for better or for worse, is really who he is. To everybody, it's not a character anymore. It's him. It's not some guy who's on a reality TV show. It's Donald Trump, and he's somebody that people trust for whatever reason. Even though, again, you can document how many times he's flip-flopped in the course of one conversation, and that's powerful. I mean, it's won the Republican primary, and we need to tap into that going forward if we want to have any hope at winning future elections, especially on the presidential level, is being a part of the culture, participating in the culture, and having our candidates not just drone on about, what issues they care about. That's important. And I want to hear that, and you want to hear that, Vince. And I'm sure the people that we're talking to, our listeners, care about this stuff. But average people don't care about the Constitution.
Both. Yeah.
Average people don't care about Edmund Burke.
Yeah.
Average people don't care about, James Madison.
But I'm not going to lie. I mean, when I hear Ted Cruz call a basketball hoop a basketball, what was it again?
I don't
remember, but a circle.
It was
Something
bad.
bad.
It was
But
really bad.
it just shows you how out of touch you are of the culture.
Yeah.
And I think to JD's point, it's not an indication that he didn't know what that was. It's an indication that he pretended to know something that he didn't know, and he's so out of the cultural loop as a result of it.
Right, and I guess it's hard to really put this on any one candidate, and Ted did some stuff. Like he was on, he went on the Tonight Show and did whatever skits with Jimmy Fallon, did all that stuff. He has a horrendous Princess Bride set. He's a comedian. He likes to tell jokes and do impressions, and his Princess Bride is not good. But that's something at least he was trying. A for effort.
Yeah.
But we need something that's better than. First off, we need something that's better than that.
Yeah.
But we need to be able to actually transcend just politics.
Yeah.
And we made fun of the whole concept of somebody that you want to have a beer with. That's kind of an important thing. I mean, you can talk about the issues until the cows come home, but if you can't get anybody to like you, you're sunk.
If you're not relatable, why should the people end up voting for you?
Yeah, absolutely. This does seem to have gone a little bit far from the topic of the Hunger Games.
But I think to bring it all back to the Hunger Games, I think it's important because culture is a part of the Hunger Games. Even.
Yes.
And culture is how the revolution occurs.
Absolutely.
It occurs from within the culture.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of that right now. As you said, Bernie Sanders is a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
Not he himself, but sort of the movement surrounding him, which is a remnant to a large extent, I think, of the Obama movement.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's just continuing on in a different form with a different guy at the front.
There was one other point too. The other point is, I know we talked about this, I think, last time with our last book. The Conservative Heart.
Arthur Brooks.
Yeah, Arthur Brooks. But this was an important point that I think, again, was in the Hunger Games, is it was gaining that moral high point.
Yes.
She becomes the moral character.
Exactly.
The government loses their moral high point.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And it's the same thing that's happening today in our culture, is the left, for lack of is gain that moral high ground. They seem like the people who are trying to help people.
Yeah, and to a large extent, Donald Trump is the opposite, or I don't want to say opposite, but he's sort of
the inverse.
He's fighting for a past morality.
Yes,
he's fighting for people who don't like it when people come up to them and say, you're triggering me.
Right.
They don't like that sort of social justice focus that has, for several reasons, entered into culture right now, and it's kind of a weird situation because on one hand it claims to be an extension of civil rights, civil rights movement in large extent, but it's also very interested in policing speech, and there is no right to not be offended. That doesn't exist. There's, you should try and be a nice person. Like that, my personal opinion is you should try not to be a jerk, but nobody has the right to not be offended.
We're going to be offended throughout life, and
exactly.
And it's going to be a moral argument in the next 5 to 10 years about how far we should go.
Yeah. So on that note, you want to give your rating of
sure.
of the Hunger Games?
Well, I guess on a scale of 5 stars.
Sure.
Let's go 5 stars. I would give it a 4.5 out of 5. I do agree with JD. I think the second book, and I actually think Mockingjay is very good as well. Mockingjay should not have been broken up into 2 different parts.
No, it should not have for the movies, no.
But of course they do it to make more money. But I think those, if you actually add the whole series, I'd give that I'd actually say it's a 5 out of 5.
I agree. I would give the whole series a 5 out of 5. The first book, I think it's a strong 4.5. I think I'll agree with you there. 4.5 on the first book, Catching Fire is, it gets a lot better. I think I will disagree with you on Mockingjay. I thought Mockingjay was kind of a mess in the middle of it. It started off strong and it ended strong. Middle was kind of lacking to me. But on the whole, I think this is a great series of books that if you have anybody that that is, interested in liberty, interested in the stuff that sort of is at the roots of the conservative or libertarian or Republican movements, read this book with them. Give them this book. It's you can get the whole trilogy on Amazon for like $9 in ebook form. Send it off to your to your niece or nephew or whoever. Let them read this. It's a really good book for
mother, father.
Yeah, there you go. It's a good book for
I think all ages. Yeah.
All ages, but certainly for the young adult
yes.
In your life that might be interested in conservative politics, might not, but it's a good thing to read. It's a good thing to learn, and it's a good thing to talk about. Certainly in relation to what's going on in North Korea, what's gone on in Cuba for so long,
and historically as well. Looking at people like World War II and what happened there. Yeah. It's just going to be looked at in so many perspectives.
Yes, absolutely. So with that, I think that we're going to wrap this up. We'll meet again in another 2 months.
2 months. We're going to meet up again in 2 months. We encourage everyone to come out. If you have an idea on the day that would be best, you think, for all of us, we're open to it.
We are not going to do it on Cinco de Mayo.
No, there will not be another Cinco de Mayo day, fortunately, to be able to do for another year.
That's what we should have done. We should have done. We should have done up the Cinco de Mayo.
Should have gone to a Mexican restaurant.
Yes, should have just been nothing but
even though the Mexicans don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo.
Exactly. Yeah. Daiquiris and margaritas and book club. That would be great.
And the next book will be put up for a vote on our Facebook page, as we did last time.
Absolutely. So until next book club podcast, I'm JD Bryden, and
I'm Vincent Liacona, and thanks for listening in.